The events of this story start straight from hell, in which our protagonist named Mark enters an endless fight against a whole crowd of monsters. Given his incredible power and limitless potential, he could fight them endlessly, but he sees no point in it, so in parallel he is looking for options to stop the battle. But so far, no matter how hard the guy tries, he does not succeed at all. The opponents are only arriving, and each time in even greater numbers. In the course of the battle, because of complete hopelessness, to somehow cheer himself up, he started shouting loudly that he was the king of men and a true hero. This gave him more motivation to fight on and destroy more monsters. As soon as he was able to push them back to a safe distance, a creature appeared in front of Mark. Now the guy's madly curious about the purpose of the monster, because usually such encounters never go off without a hitch. The most important thing is that he does not want to fight, because it is almost impossible to resist such a monster. In general, to put it mildly, the Lord of Hell did not like the fact that some man imagined himself to be all-powerful. Also, he was madly confused by the fact that the man who calls himself King of Men, during the war burned the houses of his own kind, and sometimes there were even cases that took their lives. So based on this information, we can understand that Mark, in the eyes of the Lord of Hell, is no more than a common sinner, so he will definitely have to answer for all his actions, and the punishment will not stop exactly until the suffering of the guy will not be equal to all the lives that he took. Now, a little backstory. Back when Mark was still King of Hell, he was walking with his little servant, and he was thinking that it was time to retire. But before he did, he needed to find a successor to replace him and take over the hard work. When the guys had already decided about the candidates, Mark thought about the fact that now he only had to pass the path of rebirth. The assistant immediately warned him that it would be quite difficult to do it. But given the fact that even ordinary people can cope, the guy was not worried. As soon as Mark opened the special room where people enter the first stage of rebirth, his expression changed dramatically. First of all, he was madly embarrassed by the fact that it was too quiet, and secondly, there was a forest that had never been there before, and now it looked more like heaven than hell. Also somewhere disappeared river, which was full of blood. Now there is ordinary water. Instead of the wild screams of sinners, around you could hear birds singing. In short, this is just some kind of madness, which is not subject to any normal explanation. Then the guys found something even more terrible, namely the cauldron, which should boil and punish sinners suddenly cooled. Now it is just ordinary rainwater. After seeing this, the assistant suggested to go back. After all, this place is not suitable for Mark. At this time, the guy was in quiet terror, because he began to realize that his rebirth is under great threat, and if not to return everything to its place, it may not happen at all. Of course, as the future king, he has to stay calm, but it's very difficult to do so. Suddenly something strange began to happen to the assistant. His form gradually changed and basically he could no longer control his body. Then Mark began to feel the same thing. It's hard to explain what's going on, but most of all it's like some kind of magical power. A little while later, a bright yellow light came down from the sky. It looked pretty scary, but in reality, at least for now, it didn't do any harm. When he couldn't see anything around him, Mark started to hear a voice in his head. He didn't realize who was trying to talk to him, but he decided to keep the conversation going anyway. As it turned out, God himself came on the line and for some reason started talking in a commanding tone, even though hell is not his territory. Over time, Mark realized that he couldn't be reborn because of him. But as it turns out, he is no longer his servant, because he recently retired from the army. That means only one thing: God can no longer command them. After these words, the connection is cut off abruptly, the yellow light disappears somewhere, and the boys are able to function normally again. When the gap in the sky began to close gradually, the boy didn't think long before he jumped out of his seat in time to put his hand there and prevent it from closing. After God had completely reworked the room for rebirths, he took with him one more thing, without which the process could not be started. But since Mark wants it so badly, he just can't pass up the opportunity to try to get her back, and at the same time to get revenge on God for causing so much damage to hell. So, at his own risk, he decides to climb into the crevice and thus move into the human world. In the sky, it looked as if some meteorite had gone off its course and flew towards the planet Earth quite by accident. After landing, the guy immediately had a huge number of questions, because for some reason in the world of people there were strong disturbances, and there was only chaos around. Everything around was burning so badly, as if it was the end of the world or some kind of full-scale war. People were running and screaming, because they were very frightened and didn't even understand what was going to happen next. Of course, to find out what scared them so much, the guy decided not to run away and to see what would happen next. A few minutes later, right in the middle of the fire, silhouettes of human-like creatures began to appear. But of course they couldn't be human, because their skin couldn't withstand such enormous temperatures. As it turned out, these were the monsters from hell, but how they got here was hard to explain. But now it was clear where they had gone from hell. But if in hell they could only serve their punishment, then here they did absolutely everything they wanted. For example, they destroyed houses, and destroyed all living things on their way, and so on. The most unlucky of all were those people who for some reason did not have time to clean up far away. Of course, in this situation, Mark could not continue to do nothing, so he decided to slowly start helping people. For example, in this situation, the monster was already 100% sure that he had the easiest victim in his hands, but just one punch with his fist changed the situation completely. For some reason, this mysterious creature was convinced that everything that was happening now was the boy's doing, and against this background it began to accuse him, wanting to get to the bottom of the situation first. In general, all these creatures that create total chaos, in the past were the most ordinary people. Such a form must take every sinner after losing his life. In hell they are called the deceased. There they pay a huge price for all their sins that have committed during their lives. When a repentant soul has served its sentence, it is reborn, but since the rebirth and punishment room is no longer in operation, it's hard to say what happens next. To begin with, Mark tried to talk to them, but almost immediately realized it was pointless. After all, it was immediately obvious from the interlocutors that they were not ready for a constructive dialogue, and nothing more than mooing and attempts to attack should be expected from them. Therefore, Mark decided not to try to do the impossible and immediately responded to them practically the same way. At least these monsters have no armor at all, and absolutely every one of them can be defeated with just one blow. The only difficulty may lie only in their quality, because no matter how you spin them, really a lot of them, and on each of the forces, may simply not be enough. Meanwhile, the first trouble was not long in coming. While he was fighting the monsters that stood in front of him, others began to climb from behind, and even managed to touch his body with their small hands. Of course, as long as Mark is full of strength, he is completely safe, but nevertheless his strength is not infinite. Then, after a few more minutes of fighting, Mark asked himself a logical question: why are these monsters attacking him? Are they so stupid that they can't realize that in front of him stands an opponent much stronger than them, and will not give himself to some sinners from hell? In a moment, he was so thoroughly bored of taking part in this pointless fight that he decided to use his skill and destroy this entire crowd at once. After delivering a powerful punch, Mark deliberately stepped aside to watch the result and talk to his assistant. As suddenly the guys noticed that right out of a huge flame, about to come out of some of the monsters, and when they saw it with their own eyes, they were shocked, to put it mildly, because it directly indicates that the opponent is some unusual and probably has a completely different atmosphere. The monster also smells a particularly strong odor of blood, which probably means that this monster has killed the most innocent people. But unfortunately, the surprises didn't end there, because the monster picked up a sharp object from the ground and started to move towards the guy quickly. After a little analyzing everything that happened, Mark finally understood for himself why this monster was destroying so many people. It's quite simple: he was absorbing their life force, in order to be reborn in the future arbitrarily. But there's no way to let that happen, because rebirth without punishment is an infernal taboo. So with maximum effort, the guy concentrated all his strength into one fist and struck the strongest blow directly on the stomach, after which the sinner at a great speed flew sideways and hit the concrete wall, which of course causes additional damage. When it was over, Mark decided to go over and see what was left of the monster that had survived such a thing. By the way, he felt quite calm, because he was already 90% sure that the opponent was completely unable to function, and posed no threat whatsoever. The guy also blamed himself for having met this thing so late, because he realized that through it had probably passed just a huge number of people who could just run away and live happily ever after. Against the background of strong anger, he even decided to kill the opponent just in case. But instead of definitely never waking up again, the monster initially opens his eyes abruptly, and then suddenly attacks the guy. But the interesting thing about it is that he did it with such force as if he hadn't missed that very powerful blow, and wasn't injured at all. But even despite this excessive activity of the opponent, Mark felt more or less normal, because he could easily dodge all the blows, and with a great desire to retaliate at any time. But as they say in this business, the most important thing is to wait for the right moment. He grabbed a stone from the floor and tried to attack Mark with it. The guy didn't expect such a turn of events, because at least his skull is much stronger than this stone, and it would be impossible to inflict any injuries with it. But unfortunately at one point something went not quite according to plan. While Mark was completely engrossed in the fight, a whole bunch of other monsters snuck up on him, stealthily blocked the ability to move, and deliberately held in place so that their comrade could successfully finish the attack. And as sad as it sounds, he managed to land a precise blow with a stone right on his head. After that, in the midst of intense anger, Mark made sure that his opponent could never make such blows again, namely deprived him of one of his body parts. Now as you can see, the opponent is not laughing, but in the trailer it is not surprising, because he could not even think that this could happen. Then with the help of his abilities, Mark decided to try to tame all the monsters that are in the area. To do so, he began to emit a special smoke, which eventually spread to the floor of the city. When the monster inhales it, it starts an irreversible process of changing consciousness, and after a few minutes, such a creature is completely under the control of its master and will follow all instructions. To spread that smoke as far as possible, Mark went up to the high ground on purpose. Now all the deceased looked like red little gnomes, completely harmless, and certainly no longer posed any danger, well, at least not to their master. Every second the monsters grew more and more numerous, because mentally the lad gave them the order to converge as quickly as possible in one place and dodge in front of him. After that he decided that for all their atrocities, these deceased should receive a new sentence, and fulfill it from the beginning to the very end. Before we pass a verdict, we have to consider their most important crimes, namely, escaping from Hell territory, organizing chaos among civilians, and a bunch of other petty crimes. As a result, each of them will have to sit for at least 700 years for the chaos, and 2.000 for the escape, and 10.000 each for those who destroyed civilians. After Mark said the verdict out loud, he opened the teleportation passage to Hell. When the monsters saw that right now they would be going to a place where nature was beautiful, birds sang and clean water flowed, they were shocked to say the least and couldn't understand what the catch was. Some of them even started to ask if they were going there. In response to this, guy said that it's okay that there is pure nature, because it doesn't even roughly mean that you can't serve sentences there. The first time the monsters will endlessly weed, and then they will definitely come up with something new, in this they cannot even doubt. In the end, when the guys once again asked what to do, the guy got mad and told them to remove all the grass they see, and the peculiarity of this task is that you have to do the work by hand, without any additional tools. In principle, their indignation is understandable, because the forest is very huge, and it is not a fact that I have enough 10,000 years to do the job. But as they say, the problem of the sinner, the king is not interested, so the guy just closed the portal, and went on to do his job. Then the assistant gave the operative information that a couple of monsters in the area had managed to escape, and of course it was desirable to catch them before they could harm people. After hearing this information, Mark was shocked, because it should be said immediately, not half an hour later. Then the boy asked in which direction they went, and immediately went after them, so as not to let them go too far away. As it turned out later, the monsters were lodged right in the school, because they sensed that there were people inside and tried to do everything to catch them. Looking at all this from the outside, the guys realized that it would be quite difficult for them to get to the exit, so they had no choice but to try to find another way. Despite the rather dire situation, they tried to maintain optimism and in no way lose heart. The girl with the blue hair is an undertaker, which means that she has light abilities that can definitely help in the process of escape. By the way, her name is Mariana. When the monsters were already close, she immediately told her friends to go upstairs and decided to stay behind, to keep the creatures down a little longer. Despite their fearsome appearance and the great desire to destroy humanity, the girl felt quite confident, and without any problems dared to fight the monsters with her bare hands. She deliberately waited until her friends opened the door, and only then made a strong kick with her foot to throw the monsters back a bit. This allowed her to buy some time. But unfortunately it was not so sweet. One of the girls was caught by the sinner's foot and was about to bite her. To protect her friend, she had to sharply put her shoulder and make it so that the monster bit her. Basically, the first part worked for us more than fine. Now the most important thing is to give him a good leg kick in the face, and as soon as possible to run away from here. When Mariana asked her friend if she was okay, instead of getting some kind of thanks for saving her, she got only rudeness, and asked not to touch her. Frankly, this is the most wrong reaction to Marina. In the meantime, they had to get to the roof as soon as possible, and close the door well behind them, so that the monsters wouldn't be able to tear it open for a while. Let's hope that at least until Mark arrives, this door will be able to withstand such a powerful influx of monsters. Then one of the group took out a pistol with a flare gun, and immediately fired a shot into the air. This made the chances of the guy arriving on time much better. For some reason, Mariana felt so calm, and during dialogues even managed to laugh. This, to put it mildly, did not like the rest of the group, because they are set up as negatively as possible, and almost 100% sure that they will not be able to survive. Also, when Karina saw that Mariana did not react, she decided to continue to press her, and constantly remind her that she almost lost her life because of her, because the man with the title of Undertaker too long fought off the monsters, and foolishly let one inside. In general, Karina's insolence was simply unbounded. At the end of her speech, she even thought of threatening her father, because he is some very high-ranking official. As suddenly on the roof suddenly appeared Mark, and instead of greeting the savior, Karina again began to show her discontent. Then in the process of dialogue, the girl finally noticed that the guy was wearing a rather strange outfit, so she decided to ask who he was. In this case, Mark replied that he was the king of hell. After these words for a while the guys were silent, and then assumed that the guy was just a psycho and nothing more. Then, to confuse them even more, Mark began to tell them that not far from here he smelled blood, and he was looking for the dead. But instead of listening carefully, or at least trying to understand the meaning of these words, the guys just started laughing and making fun of the guy in every possible way. A little later Mark was approached by his assistant, and they talked a little among themselves. The funny thing about this situation is that ordinary people can't see the assistant of the King of Hell, so from the outside it looked like the guy was talking to himself, and completely ignoring everyone else. By the way, it was a question of destroying these guys, because they behave most improperly towards the elders. Of course it is true, but Mark did not support this idea, because he knew that when their parents are deprived of life, they will certainly go to hell for such upbringing of children, and therefore everything will be responsible. One of the guys, named Wally, for some reason began to regard this statement as a threat, although in fact Mark did not even think of such a thing. Then, to prevent this small conflict from eventually turning into a fight, Mariana decided to stand up for the guy and try to calm them down. But unfortunately, in response to this gesture of goodwill, the guy reacted very aggressively, and pushed the girl to the ground, because in his opinion, she was in the wrong business, and no one was interested in her opinion. Then, by chance, Mark noticed that Mariana had recently been bitten by a monster. Since such bites are mostly a big problem, the question arises whether the girl will be able to make it to the moment when the rest of the undertakers arrive here. Also, taking a closer look at her face, Mark realized for himself that it was quite familiar, as if he had met it somewhere before. Meanwhile, Wally wouldn't stop freaking out. He was screaming as loud as if there was absolutely no problem in the world at the moment other than figuring things out with someone you were seeing for the first time. According to the kid, if his father went to hell, the king of hell would cry and pray to him. Of course, such a loud statement made Mark laugh, and to be frank, he could hardly contain himself from laughing very loudly. This reaction, to put it mildly, was not very pleasant for Wally, so at one point he just froze, and didn't even know how to behave further. Apparently he wants to hit, but for some reason he is afraid to start, so it can be concluded that his character is rather weak. After a few more minutes of silence, the guy pulls himself together and prepares to hit, thinking that his dad will deal with it anyway. But just as the fist was about to reach its target, lightning strikes Mark, he disappears, and then within a few seconds reappears in about the same place, only a meter farther away. Of course, no one understood what happened, but instead of explaining himself, the guy just went over to Mariana to help her. Because the girl was already in a very bad condition, she began to talk deliriously and to say that she would protect everyone, even at the cost of her life. After these words, she coughed a lot and blood began to come out of her mouth. But even after that, the girl just asked to come up to her, so as not to get anyone dirty. The poor kid was so scared of the half-dead girl that he even pulled out his knife and threatened her with it. But unfortunately that wasn't the end of it, he tried to stab her. As a rule, when the sinner appeared on the horizon, Mark just watched him closely, but deep down he knew that if he ignored the situation and let it go, he would regret it for the rest of his life, because this particular situation was as wrong as possible. Mariana deserved to live. Mark squeezed the boy's hand so hard that he not only threw the knife away, but in addition to that he started screaming and begging to let go of it, in which case one can only imagine the pain there. Against this background he was so much out of control that he began to threaten to destroy the boy. When Mark heard these words, he decided to ask a question for Wally. Does he really think it's so easy to destroy a man? Although considering how old he is, he could only have been taught such phrases by his parents. He couldn't have come to it himself. It's also confirmed by the fact that the kid never answered. Eventually, even after Mark let go of his hand, it didn't end there. The kid also continued to threaten him and promised that he would throw the body to the monsters to do whatever they wanted, and then added that they wouldn't do anything because Mark stinks so badly. This kid has obvious mental health issues. Even with everything that had just happened, the guy wanted to try again to explain to Wally that he would have to answer for all the words he was saying out loud, but when Mark realized that once again he wasn't even going to listen, he decided to go a little different way. Mark picked up a small wooden casing from the floor, made it as smooth as possible, and asked Wally to look at it closely. Of course, the boy couldn't think of anything, so I had to give him a little help. It's a so-called magic wand, with which you can attack your opponents with various spells. Only in this case, the wand is without magic, and it's Wally who will be attacked with it. Hopefully, at least this time the kid realized what would happen to him if he continued to behave like that. But this was not the end of it. Mark gave the first preventive blow to see how he reacted, and since he was pretty calm, he decided to try it again, but only harder. In the end, in the process of upbringing, the child began to cry a lot. It says only one thing: the stick has completely fulfilled its function, and in principle you can finish. But even so, Mark was not going to stop. He liked it so much that each time he hit harder and harder. Even the servants started to ask him to stop, because that's just too much. The boy's friends were just open-mouthed in shock, and they didn't even know how they could help their friend, because if you look at Mark, he's scary to approach. After a few more minutes the man finally stopped, and at once inquired of the little ruffian how he felt. Suddenly he had not had enough and needed to add more, to fully understand the responsibility for his actions. But no matter how much Wally wanted to, he couldn't answer yet. When suddenly Karina screamed that monsters were coming up to the roof. She was so scared that at the sight of absolutely any danger she started crying uncontrollably. Tears flow by themselves and it's almost impossible to stop them, even despite her great desires. When Mariana saw that she was so scared, she decided to stand up for this insolent girl with a rich dad, and told her that she could thank her after the rescue. They acted the same old way. Karina runs away, and Mariana tries to hold back the crowd until the very last moment. Initially, the girl did not want to run away alone, because she suspected that there are also monsters downstairs, but when she saw what was happening on the street, she immediately realized that the bottom of the building is exactly no one else. Now to escape, the guys will have to open the door, which they closed just tightly. Then, just before the battle started, Mark approached Marjane and persuaded her to go with the guys, because he himself can deal with these monsters without any problems. In response, the girl said that she has a mad desire to help, and is not going to run away from danger. To be honest, the guy has seen quite a lot of people in his life, but this is the first time he has seen such a specimen as this girl. He does not understand why Mariana is trying to help these people instead of saving herself, because they insult her, ignore her, and in the extreme case will never help in return. They have absolutely no part, and Mariana still continues to risk her life, for the sake of some children from rich families. But even despite such a quite logical story, the girl did not stop it in any way, and even on the contrary motivated, and in her opinion for his years, the guy talks too much. For her all these words are just nonsense and nothing more, because if a man has the ability, he should take and protect those who are weaker than him. When the monsters have finally climbed to the roof, Mariana made a brilliant deduction. She reported that it is really dangerous here, just Captain Hindsight. But in any case, no matter how it was, the girl should not lose her life, because next to her is Mark, and he will definitely help her to triumph over these pathetic sinners. As suddenly, quite by accident, the guy heard the conversation of the guys outside the door, and as it turned out they deliberately closed on the roof. They did it for one simple reason, because they just do not care whether Mariana can live or not. The most important thing is to save themselves, and everything else does not matter. Also did not have time to laugh at the guys who stayed behind the door, but it is so hard to believe, do they really from this fun? In order to get back at least some revenge on these ungrateful people, Mark ordered his assistant to do something bad. The only condition is to make sure that they do not lose their lives, and the rest can be done, of course. The assistant liked the idea very much, and he immediately went to carry out. Meanwhile, Mariana began to slowly give up her position. The monsters were in full swing to sneak onto the roof, and already even some of them began to attack the Mark. But in order to save her comrade, the girl rushed straight at him, and with her back blocked the opponent's blow. Of course, without wasting a minute, the monsters immediately began to taste the girl. Realizing what was happening, the guy just once again asked her why she was doing it, because he just didn't understand how he could so easily give up the life of a person whom you see for the first time in your life. In response, Marjane said that in order to perform a heroic act, she does not need a reason, just an opportunity to do it, and she will never refuse if she realizes that her actions can save someone's life, as well as to protect other people is the meaning of her life. As a result, the deceased have gone completely insane and are relentlessly destroying innocent people, even beautiful people like Marianne. And God's rules are the law, but when it comes to the lives of civilians, Mark can't afford to sit idly by. Against this background, he is simply forced to transcend himself, and begin to confront these sinners on a full scale, to make the maximum of his efforts, and not even think about the consequences, because otherwise to solve this issue is simply impossible. He also promised himself that Mariana will definitely live. Still in his head, the guy asked God not to stop him in any way, because from now on he plans to do whatever he wants, or rather whatever he thinks is right. Against the guys running away from the monsters together, the guy started asking the girl in advance what she would like to be in the next life just in case. In the end it was decided to stop that in the next life Mariana will be reborn in the family of a rich landowner. When she grows up will have a large salary, a good pension, vacation when she wants, in general not a job, but just a fairy tale something better and cannot think of. Before performing one unique miracle, Mark asked the girl how she was feeling, although in fact he was so well aware that her condition was not the best. In response to such a stupid question, Mariana said that most likely the next time they would see each other would be in the next life. Despite such sad predictions, Mark snapped his fingers with a smile on his face and said that no, we will live now. Then the process of teleportation to the infernal manifestation begins. Now if you look closely, you can see that Mariana is completely healthy and can function as a normal human being. This place is Mark's personal hell, and the girl is the first to be here in a human body. Initially she was shocked that hell was so beautiful, and then she finally realized that all her wounds were gone. Without thinking, Mariana applied for a job, and wondering what was in front of her. Actually, the guy had already introduced himself, but given the state of the girl, he decided to repeat, only this time he did it more pathos and officially. After hearing the information, the little girl for the second time fell into a real shock, and could not understand what was going on around her. Then the guy asked for her hand and tied a red ribbon on it, which gives the girl unique powers. From now on she will never age again, and she will never lose her life. So all she has to do is just live and enjoy life. To be frank, the girl's joy was simply no limit. Gradually she begins to realize what is even happening and slowly comes to her senses. Suddenly the guys noticed a sudden change in the weather. Mark understood perfectly well what it meant, but for some reason he was in no hurry to tell them. But as the girl's curiosity began to take over, she did not wait for the story, began to slowly ask everything herself. Also this thread, which the guy tied to her hand, is called the thread of fate. Without it Mariana under no circumstances cannot survive here. Therefore, the most important thing is not to lose her in any case, and even if this happened, it is necessary to immediately turn to the guy, because the count will go by minutes. Then again at the snap of a finger Mariana suddenly moves into the ordinary world, where a comrade tries to wake her up and talks about how much she worries. As soon as the girl woke up, the first thing she thought was that it was just a dream and nothing more, but whether it was really so she would soon find out. By the way, because she hadn't opened her eyes for too long, the guy got so worried that he almost had a heart attack. First of all, right now there is a general cleanup after the invasion of sinners, and secondly, those guys with whom the girl came back are behaving quite strangely. Of course Marjane immediately inquired in more detail, but what happened to them? In general, they were originally hiding in the classroom, but something went wrong because at least some of them are completely covered with a sticky liquid, as if something huge had licked them. She looked at her hand and saw the thread of fate that Mark had tied on her hand, and her joy was unbound, though it was still unclear how it would turn out. Then the bosses came to the workplace. They were already aware of everything, so they immediately asked the girl how she was feeling and if she had any injuries. When they found out that everything was fine, they immediately stopped being gentle and loudly declared that they were not worried at all. They also added that if it were not for the unique ability of the girl, they would not pay attention to her at all. The most important thing is not to be late for work and did everything on time, without any delays. This is the current attitude to employees: you work hard, but in return you get only disrespect. After this conversation, Charlie immediately ran up to Marjane and tried to cheer her up in some way. In his opinion, do not take dialogues with superiors seriously, because these people are never kind. They have a job to keep employees on a short leash. Of course, there is some truth in these words, but in any case it is a shame, and I would like it to never happen again. When the workday came to an end, Mariana called a cab, said goodbye to her close friend, and went home, happy. She had to get there as soon as possible, because tomorrow she had to return to this place in the morning. On the way the girl kept thinking about how she should proceed, and she was also a little confused by the fact that Mark forbade her to remove the thread of fate, because if it happened, then according to him it would be the end. As suddenly, Mark's assistant appeared right next to the girl. He informed her that she had made a contract with Hell, and now must act strictly according to its clauses. Because the assistant appeared too suddenly, the girl was scared out of her wits and screamed at the whole car, thus scaring the driver to death. First of all, the man decided to stop and immediately asked the passenger how she was feeling, and only after she replied that everything was fine, he could afford to go on the road favorably. He was in a rather high spirits, and in principle everyone was satisfied. Since the girl had never seen the helper, of course she initially asked him who he was and if other people could see him. But as we already know, it's not worth worrying about, because Hell's helpers are only visible to those who cooperate with him. According to the assistant, he had gone to some students, but since he had gone there alone, he should return quickly. After these words, Mariana remembered how much pleasure he had taken in punishing Wally, and even began to worry a little. In the meantime, Mark was already very close to his goal, and frankly speaking, he was very surprised when he saw how huge the building he needed to get into. At one point the guy even wondered if it would be difficult for him to find the people he was looking for, because there were countless of them there. No matter how to turn back, there is no way back. You need to make every effort, and try to perform the task more than well. But no matter what, the fighting spirit of our hero was not, with the first problem he encountered at the entrance to the building, instead of entering the door like all people, looked somewhere and crashed into the glass. Even though our hero was warned that he was moving a little bit wrong, it didn't stop him, but probably even on the contrary awakened an even greater desire to try to come exactly where he was going. As a result of which the guy suffered a sharp face plant against the glass. Of course our hero would not be like himself if he did not finish it. In order to get through, Mark used his power, and gradually began to destroy the glass, until it cracked completely. For some reason, at this point, his joy was unbounded, if it was really that much fun. Meanwhile, all the people who were inside the building were shocked to say the least, because Mark's head managed to break through the high-quality armored glass and not get any injuries. It directly indicates that he is not an ordinary person, and it is not clear what purpose he came here for. Some girl from the second floor, when she heard all this screaming, she went out on the balcony to see what was going on, and when she saw Mark, she was just crazy. I wonder who he is, and why he has such a strong energy. By the way, her name is Marina, and apparently she is also far from the most ordinary person, because almost from the first time allowed the theory that the guy is the king of hell. At one point the guys crossed eyes, and Mark, not long thinking, decided to get acquainted closer, because the girl seemed to him quite familiar. For the first time they just looked at each other and were silent. Then Marina was 100% convinced that her theory was true. This is really the king of hell. To break the silence, the girl decided to make contact first, and asked what was going on. In response, the guy pointed his finger at her, and asked who she was. This situation made Marina laugh, because so unceremoniously to her no one has not yet approached her. But when she calmed down a little, she immediately told about the fact that previously lived in hell, and knows the Mark quite well. Suddenly their sweet dialogue, there were some guys downstairs, either were walking very slowly and arguing amongst themselves quite loudly. As it turned out, among these three guys is the same Wally. The joy of the Mark just made me feel good, because this is at least one of the people he was looking for. Before Mark jumped down, Marina urged him not to hurry and to listen to her, because is it so important to punish some unfortunate boy? In response to such a rather strange question, Mark said that in this world judges, police and all other law enforcement agencies can turn a blind eye to some deeds or just say that it is not so important, but the guy is the king of hell, and he in no way will not let the sinners relax, because they must respond. In general, the Mark knowingly warned the boy that if he did not reflect on what he had done, who would be repunished. To be honest, Wally was shocked, because he was almost 100% sure that Mark couldn't escape after being locked up on the roof. But anyway, now the boy will have to be punished for his deed, namely Mark will once again poke him with a stick, but at least several times stronger, because as practice shows, to Wally very badly reaches even through the pain. Meanwhile Marina was watching very closely what was going on downstairs, and to be honest she couldn't understand, since when the king of hell punishes people with just one wand, but it looks quite interesting. Let's see what happens next. After these words, the poor boy, all in tears, fell to the floor, and just began to beg Mark Tom not to do it. because this punishment is as painful as possible, and the boy in no way wanted to feel all this again. Suddenly, one of the men pumped the entire hallway about the intruder being right here and asked everyone else to catch him before he at least broke something else. At that moment, Marina raised her hand sharply upward and asked everyone not to touch the intruder under any circumstances. After all, he is not the enemy. When the men retreated, Mark realized that apparently this girl is a great leader. Now he is madly curious to know who she really is and why she is obeyed by everyone. Let's hope that she just occupies some high position, and not do it all with the help of magic. By the way, Wally did not wait for his punishment. At the first opportunity decided to run away. In principle he can be understood, but in any case in the end will have to answer. No matter how fast he did not run, you cannot escape from the King of Hell. Mark immediately wanted to follow him, but the guards and the boy stopped him at once, arguing that this boy is the son of the chairman of the Kansa Corporation, the largest conglomerate in Korea. He has great influence in business. But as we already know, arguments like this can't influence the brand, so he reacted accordingly. In this case, the man briefly thought, decided to try to explain to the guy why you should not touch the baby a little in a different language, namely the language of pain, but fortunately even in this plan failed, because all his huge muscles were not enough even to move the Mark even a millimeter. Then Mark started talking about how he didn't care what kind of businessman the son was, because money doesn't decide anything in the afterlife. Given the way the guard told about his boss, he is 100% sure that the man who has the power can afford to commit crimes, and for this he will be absolutely nothing. But in fact the world is not so simple, and eventually everyone will be punished for their bad deeds. But even with such a serious story, the man apparently didn't understand anything at all and didn't draw any conclusions for himself. Because at this moment he starts tearing his clothes and activates an ability called Iron Fist to try to put Mark in his place. As soon as the transformation was successfully completed, he would jump out of his seat and start moving towards Mark with great speed. After that he just starts throwing a lot of punches, which the guy apparently doesn't block on purpose, so that the opponent feels confident about himself. As soon as the series of punches was over, the opponent began to feel like an incredible champion. At this moment he had such an expression on his face, as if he had won the World Kickboxing Tournament. But he was not happy for long, because Mark is not as easy as it seems, and is already behind his opponent's back. The opponent's opponent was at least already shocked that the guy was acting as if nothing had just happened. What is happening at the moment in the opponent just not indicated in the head. Then after a long and deft defense, Mark suddenly attacked, and made just a gorgeous kick with his foot on the head, after which such a huge opponent flew a few meters away, but the pressure did not end there. Followed by a good series of punches. At this point the guy was doing himself justice, and frankly, this was the first time in 3 months that he had swung so hard. So at this point the opponent had best not try to raise his head. But given the power Mark has, he will not do it, because you know very well that it will not end well. As a result, after the last blow absolutely the whole hall was in smoke. It happened because the opponent's head broke through the concrete floor. That was the end of the fight, because the opponent was still head down and didn't even move. Looking at the fight from the outside, the girl noticed that Mark was doing great, but something told her that he was a little weaker than before. Then the guy turned sharply towards the girl, and asked her why people need a shroud, because a shroud is a garment for those who have lost their lives. Marina answered that there was nothing strange in it, because as a rule ordinary people use this clothes for personal defense. When the deceased first came to the ordinary world 20 years ago, people tried to protect themselves, but then no one knew that people themselves are much weaker than these sinners, and against this background suffered great losses. Also not to be forgotten is the backdrop against which they grow stronger. When the deceased cross the river Styx, they are bitten by scaly monsters, then for 1,000 years they run to avoid losing their lives, plow the land with 100-pound weights and so on. In short, they do a lot of hard work. The more crimes a sinner has committed, the longer he is condemned, and accordingly the stronger he will be compared to humans. Therefore, in this period of life, The shroud is simply an integral part of every person. The chance to survive with it during a fight is much greater than without. Recently, most people have become undertakers to fight the dead and protect the world. But also among them, there are specimens like this bodyguard. He just went in a different direction, and basically feels more or less normal too. As suddenly together with the assistant on the horizon appears Mariana, and judging by the way the girl stands she is quite tired. By the way, Marina, when she saw the assistant, was insanely happy, because earlier she worked with him very closely. The last time they saw each other was about 300 years ago. When the guy saw that the guys knew each other, he was shocked to say the least, because he didn't remember to have introduced them before, but it's not surprising, because too much time had passed. Then, when the guys were talking to each other, they remembered that Mariana was also standing next to them, and asked how she was feeling, because by the look of it she was not all right. But as it turned out later she felt more or less normal, just very tired because they were running very fast. Then the girl introduced herself, what's her name, and said she was the new Undertaker. Marina was shocked by these words, because the team had never had an Undertaker in the body of a normal person. Of course she was curious about how it happened, so she started to ask everything. But since the story was as long as possible, the assistant decided to tell it in a nutshell. After these words Marina began to show sympathy, but Mark quickly assured her that there was no need for it, because the girl is doing God's work, and there is nothing difficult in it. There are even more advantages than disadvantages to it. So Marina decided to tell us who she really was, to bring her new employee up to speed. In general, she is one of the 12 signs of the zodiac, namely a bull, and also has been in hell back in the days when everything was in red colors, not as it is now. In that case, Mark was willing to talk to her personally. He allowed the theory that maybe the girl knew what the hell was going on that could have caused it to become the way it is now. But unfortunately he didn't hear anything good in response. Maria didn't even know what could have gone wrong. After this conversation, the guy was as desperate as possible, because he had assumed that finding a Toba would be much easier, but as it turned out it was not quite so. Of course, the girl apologized to him for such a dry answer, but no matter how you look at it, it was not her fault. Now it remains only to think about how everything could reach such a state. Maybe something just happened to him, or on the contrary he just does everything on purpose, although it is even difficult to answer for what purpose he could do it. Suddenly Marina smiled and said that she had been working hard to find a solution and that she had written down all her potential developments on paper. Mark's mood lightened up a bit, and he said that the girl was doing a pretty good job. When on the subject of hell, guys basically discussed everything. The girl asked the guy where the new employee disappeared. In response to this he said that she is on a simple but very important task, the essence of which is to catch Wally, and will punish him for all his misdeeds. Because of the fact that during the chase the guys were screaming too much, a large number of people began to pay attention to them, but so far they are inclined to the fact that here they are shooting some movie. Also, before sending the girl to do this task, he entrusted her with his wand beforehand. He told her how to use it properly and added that if Marjane failed in the end, Mark would take care of it personally, but it would be better not to get to that point, because the little one would not be well then, and in general while he was free, he would not stop bothering her, so it was necessary to keep him in the tone. Unfortunately, this time the boy could not catch up, because he was running as fast as he probably never ran in his life. The girl also started to lose her coordination because of the fatigue and accidentally bumped into a passing man. Of course, the first thing she did was apologize and asked if everything was okay. To put it mildly, she didn't like it very much, because first of all, she had already asked her employee to go home a long time ago, and secondly, considering Mariana's age, she should have learned to walk normally by now. But nevertheless, since this situation happened, the boss thought it would be nice if Mariana would help her in some case, and at the same time she could redeem herself for almost maiming her. Since this girl has a very kind soul, even in her free time from work, she is ready to fulfill any whims of her bosses. The essence of the task was to catch the creature that was walking around the area. For the boss it immediately seemed as strange as possible, so she just cannot miss such an opportunity not to try to catch it. The main question is how strong it is. When Mariana realized that it was one of the deceased, she immediately suggested to her superior to weaken him with a special object, but in response did not get a positive reaction, because in the opinion of a person with a higher level, the sinner will just run away, and there is nothing more to do. After all, this particular specimen is a master. To be frank, he is being pursued by a huge number of people, and so far, none of them have not managed to catch him. For now, the plan is to simply follow him, and look for a unique opportunity to unexpectedly attack him. Watching this sinner, Marjane could not understand his actions at all, because for some reason he was walking around and going through trash cans without stopping. In response, the boss told her that this type of sinners are called patrols. They do something else on purpose for their bosses. Behind every deceased of this type, there is a more powerful, huge deceased who ruins everything. With a 90% probability, you can say that he is just one of the subordinates, and if you get on him somehow wrong, there can be big problems in the form of reinforcements. It could also be that his mission is to destroy some kind of interference. Eventually, after a few more minutes of searching, the deceased finds Wally in a dark alley. It's unclear why he's pursuing him, but from the look on his face, his intentions are far from good. As soon as the boss notices that an ordinary civilian is in danger, she immediately jumps out of her seat and starts running to his aid. To be frank, this is rather unprofessional, because she has given away her location, and at any moment she could be attacked by a completely different sinner. As she ran, she realized it was too late, but even so, she still tried to do her best. Eventually the deceased used his strength and delivered a powerful blow right in the chest for Wally. There seemed to be no chance in this situation. But by some miracle, Mariana managed to run around from the other side and take the brunt of the blow, thus protecting the boy and giving him a unique opportunity to live a carefree life. But no matter how you look at it, so far not everything is not so sweet, because at least the landing was very hard. When the boss realized how heroic her employee had done, she just couldn't contain her emotions and started talking about how good Mariana was. Then she decided to attack the creature to put an end to this confrontation. Also, to make sure everything went more than successfully, a unique skill called Stigmata Scientist was applied. Thanks to which in the hands of the performer appears a huge hammer, allowing to inflict simply colossal damage on the specified target. The most important thing is not to miss. After the attack was over, the boss asked Mariana to evacuate the civilians as soon as possible, and to call for help, because it would not be possible to get rid of this creature so easily. Without any arguments, the girl agreed with all the instructions, and proceeded to fulfill them. If we talk about help, if it does not arrive quickly enough, the boss will probably not be able to stand, because she is not a fighter herself, but rather an office worker who only knows how to correctly distribute the work for everyone else. Also, when the boss saw that the opponent has already recovered, she was shocked, to put it mildly, because as a rule after such a powerful blow, at least a few minutes, the sinner should not function at all. But even in spite of such a setup, the girl still took the fight and continued to attack. In the process of the fight, she was able to fully realize that against her at the moment is fighting, not the most ordinary deceased. It means that on his shoulders is a very large number of human lives, because only through them he could absorb useful substances for himself. As a result, the first missed blow was not long in coming, unfortunately. With the help of his long leg, he got right in the target, but Caroline did not lose consciousness, and even managed to respond immediately. The only disadvantage is that it was of little use. Because in order for her to really deliver a powerful punch, she needs to be on Earth. Because in the air, the girl has no proper foothold, and because of that, her strength is greatly reduced. Apparently the opponent realizes this, and that's why he won't let Carolina go down. In the process of the fight, the opponent was not going to stop at the achieved goals, and wanted to end it as soon as possible, because he realized that forever it cannot last. For this he began to fully apply his skills, and against the background of a strong flow of energy transformed into a bat. When the reincarnation process was complete, he grabbed Caroline, and with all his might began to beat her against the walls, until the girl began to lose consciousness. When the opponent realized that the fight was coming to an end, he was about to strike a decisive blow and put an end to this confrontation. But as they say not here, to help in time came Mariana, and at the most unexpected moment, for the monster carried a powerful knee blow right in his head. From the outside it looked as beautiful as possible. Initially thought that it came help, but when he saw the employee, to put it mildly, surprised. Mariana told her that she had made only a few calls and only one of them was answered positively, so a really serious reinforcement should arrive soon. Frankly speaking, this answer did not comfort Caroline much. After all, to cope with them they need at least 2 first-level undertakers and several second-level ones. Against this background, the boss began to return to her usual appearance, and continued to endlessly insult the employee. After all, instead of calling as many people as possible, she called only 2, and returned to the battlefield, without a full-fledged task completed. But even despite the eternal dissatisfaction of her boss, the girl successfully continued to do her job. Even though the opponent is quite powerful, Mariana is able to successfully strike him and do damage with them, unlike Carolina, who only knows how to complain. Of course, after what she had seen, she had closed her rhodite a bit, but in any case she wouldn't miss the opportunity to insult if something didn't go according to plan. In the back of her mind, Caroline was even beginning to admire, because she had never before seen how well Mariana could fight. In the end, because the sinner began to miss too many blows, he decided to retreat to regain his strength. At this point, Mariana was 100% convinced that she was really good at attacking, but now she had to figure out how to finish him off in a hurry. Suddenly, instead of just hiding somewhere, the rival begins to wind circles in the air. At first the girl did not understand what it could mean, but then Caroline told her that you need to hide as soon as possible, because this sinner is going to use one of his abilities. This time he used stealth, and to be frank, it is not clear how to resist him in this case. The only thing that saves is that the opponent has a very powerful energy, and when he is too close, it is possible to feel him. Even so, it was extremely difficult to fight against him now. It was almost impossible to plan a future attack, only by luck. Mariana managed to defend herself for the first time, but what to do next? Because it's not clear from which side he will approach next time. His great speed does not allow to concentrate even on such a strong flow of energy.